is our greetings, putting hands together, and we women, we say men will say nda. I'm starting by saying meaning greetings, to agree, to say yes, to knock knock, to show respect. To everyone, I see here we have 216 people who gathered here. When paying attention on this gathering and guided spiritually that Patireni Makaulule should do the opening, I will humbly request everyone that we go to our deepest silence. And that deepest silence is to humbly request that we no longer move, we no longer touch anything, we no longer engage to any other thing, including the facilitators and also the cameras people. This silent, I'm coming with this silent from what we have learned from the elders at home, where they were calming. And this calming is when we are now understanding things, is a reflection of what should happen, what should be done. You ancestor spirits, where are we? Where are you hiding? Why are you quiet when we're experiencing what is not good? And they will use the finger millet and the tobacco and the water. And they will use this finger millet in a silent words, which we call prayer. In our silence, I'm going to use finger millet and tobacco, not water for now. Veinwi no ri bebaho, venwi rine ra bva kha venwi. Nṋe ndi ne mphaṱeleni ṅwana wa vhewe, muḓulu wa vhewe kuḓulwane kwa vhewe. Ndi ṅwana muṱuku a si nṋe ndo ḓi rumaho uri ndi ḓe kha heḽi gogo ḽihuluhulu. Heḽi gogo ḽine ri khou amba na vheinwi, mimuya vhane a ri ni ḓivhi uri no dzumbama ngafhi. Fhedzi ri fulufhela uri hune na vha hone ni a ri pfha ngori no no vha mimuya. Ndi nṋe mphaṱeleni ndi tshi ri musi hezwi zwanḓa zwi tshi khou faraho mufho wa vhewe, mushumo khoyo, shango ḽo tsutsafhala, shango a ḽi tsha ḓivha uri ḽi ite mini, shango ḽo suṱafhala, shango ḽo tshinyiwa nga riṋe vhathu. Zwino vhenu ni tshe no ri ita uri ri ḽi ambele ri vhe dzomo ḽa mupo. Ri tshi ralo ri ambela vheinwi ri tshi ri i pfanivho zwililo zwine ra lila ngazwo shango ḽi tshi khou suṱafhala ḽo rali, na mirafho iyi i tou fhelela ra sala ri tshi ri mini. Ndi nṋe mphaṱeleni ndi tshi ri midzimu ya ṱhoni na ya ḓamuni. Nṋe ndi mukwevho, ndi amba na vheni vha kwevho no tumbukaho hanengei Luonde. Ndi amba na vheni vha ḓamuni hanengei he na tumbuka hone ni tshi wela milambo ni tshi swika fhano. Ngoho ho ḽiwa ndilo nthihi, ri tshi shavhela kha vheinwi, ha shavhelwa zwiƒoni, ha shavhelwa kha dzi kholomo dzi re mahayani. Vho makhadzi vha amba vho vuṱa. Ripfeni khe ḽi guvhangano ḽine ḽa khou amba nga zwithu zwo vhaisalaho. Ri ri mupo ngauri ri ḓivha wone mupo ndi wone tsiko. Longani zwanḓa maḓini you wina ndini. Ri rwiwe nga phepho ringe vhaṅwe. Longani zwanḓa maḓini na ndi. Heḽi shango ḽi rotholole u vhe na shothodzo. Hovhu vhuṱungu vhune ra khou tshila khaho a ri fari na dzikhofhe. Longani zwanḓa maḓini vho vhathu. Ndi ṅwana muṱuku thi ḓivhi tshithu ndi edza vheni vho makhulukuku wanga. Ndo faraho mufho a thongo uri nda mpambo. Ndi ani vhudza. A thongo kona uri ndi to ri nda mpambo. Ndi tshi u fara ngo rali u tshi fara u tshi rali. Ndi ri pfeni ngawo. Hopo tshone tsho vha tshiala tshe vheni noṱhe na vha ni tshi amba nga tsho. Hanengei tsikoni ri sa u ḓivhi. Swikani hanengei kha khuḓana dzoṱhe dza shango. In all cardinal points of the world. We reach out to our ancestors, humbly as a child. Ancestors of the all cardinal points. Join together and eat from the same dish. Eat together and drink from the same dish. That bowel that provoke you, the ancestors, to what we cannot solve by our human being minds and intelligence. And the acts and the laws of the man-made. We humble ourselves to the spirit beyond our thinking. Touch everyone who is going to talk about these aspects which are threatening life system. Bless them. Give them wisdom. The wisdom of ancient which have originated with the ancestors of the origin in 4 cardinal points. We humble ourselves and we silence ourselves for the spirit of Mupo to guide, for the spirit of Mupo to penetrate in every corner, in every ear, in every eyes, in every steps of the legs, the foot which walks this world. Many gatherings are happening due to this threat of the system of life which we see that it leads to the collapse. Mupo, 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 mupo. Ndi ralo ndi tshiri ndimela milomo ya vheni vho limani. Ndi ralo ndi tshiri ndimela milomo ya vheni vho makhadzi noṱhe vha vhakwevho. Ndi ralo ndi ṅwana muṱuku no nta. Ndi ralo ndi tshi imela vho makhadzi vhoṱhe hanengei nda mama hone. Ndi ralo ndi tshi imela milomo ya vho khotsi yanga na ya vho makhulu wanga vhe na vha ni tshi kona u dzikisa shango. Ndi ralo ndi tshi imela milomo yoṱhe ya zwifo zwo tikaho shango. Ri phalaleni ni longe zwanḓa maḓini ri rwiwe nga phepho ringe vhaṅwe. Ri rwiwe nga muya ringe vhaṅwe. Na fola kheḽi daisanani noṱhe vhakegulu na vhakalaha. Ni ri pfevho. Ni ri fhe vho vhuṱali, ni ri fhe vho nḓivho. Uri hezwo zwoṱhe hu si vhe vhuṱali hashu rine nga muthu. Hu vhe vheni vhane ni tshi amba maipfi oṱhe a dzhena hanefho dzipharani dzo teaho. Zwi amba zwoṱhe ndi tshi fulufhela uri ni ḓo ri pfha nga mupo. Na vheni vho makhadzi vhoṱhe. Ndi tshi khou zwi fulufhela. Ndi khou zwi ita ndi khou zwi fulufhela. A thi ngo ḓi gudisa ndi vheni no gudisaho. Tsimu ya ṱhoni na ita.
Thank you, Makalulele, for your blessing from the northern part of South Africa. We started yesterday with blessings from the grandmothers, and every morning, and as we close every evening, and as we close the forum in a few days, we're in the container of these blessings. So I want to thank you for everything that you brought to us today. Welcome, everyone, to the State of the World Forum. I want to welcome all of you who are on our Zoom line, the several hundred that are on our Zoom line, and also the people that are watching us from around the world as we live stream on LinkedIn and YouTube and X and Ubiquity University and State of the World Forum, Facebook. I want to also acknowledge and welcome all those who were participating in watch parties last night. The Orbs in North Carolina, the Orbs in New Mexico, and various other places around the world were very active. We're in the process of gathering some of the most impressive videos. We'll be showing those in our final session on Wednesday. But I just want to thank everybody who was participating in that. We have watch parties from all over the world. I want to welcome all the watch parties that are tuning in. It's very exciting to be part of this gathering to initiate an unprecedented conversation in human history. What we're talking about in the forum has never been raised in a public way, ever. We're in unprecedented times, and we all know that. We're in a time where the center does not hold, where chaos reigns. And as we've been pondering the shape of the forum and how after 30 years since we first initiated the State of the World Forum with Mikhail Gorbachev and Jane Goodall and various others at the end of the Cold War in the last 5 years of the second millennium before we started the third millennium, the world was very different. And now we're in a world in which it's virtually impossible for any of us to even connect the dots of what's happening, much less create a comprehensive meaning framework to what's happening. So as we've been contemplating, how do we gather people together, we realize that it needs to be around a question. We're not even capable of articulating answers right now. As sophisticated and as advanced as we've become, our world situation has stripped away all the answers by which we've governed ourselves. And as we teeter on the brink of self-destruction, the most important thing that we can do is simply ask questions. And the question that we are posing, which motivates the mission of the State of the World Forum as we reconvene between 2025 and 2030, is how can humanity, in our moment, elevate its consciousness so that we can creatively respond to four fundamental truths of our world. Truths that are true no matter who you are or where you are. They're simply true. And as we said in our opening yesterday, this is a hard thing to say, but it must be said because there's certain things that are fundamentally real. Number one, wherever you are in the world, we're all facing accelerating ecological collapse. Number two, wherever you are, we're all experiencing deepening instability at every level of human affairs. And number three, we've unleashed completely unregulated, exponential artificial intelligence. And number four, technologically advanced non-human intelligences are here on Earth. And what we realize as we ponder these data points is that we're actually dealing in this historical moment with four intelligences. We have human intelligence, nature intelligence, artificial intelligence, and cosmic intelligence. Four intelligences for the first time coming together. But we only have one future. So the challenge for we humans is, how do we discern these intelligences? How do we learn to intelligibly communicate with these intelligences so we can co-create a flourishing future? And this means we have to learn the language of consciousness. We have to learn the language of clairvoyance, because to communicate with nature or cosmos, mental telepathy, psi, the language of psionics, is what is urgently necessary. So it's that question and this emerging reality around the four intelligences that the State of the World Forum seeks to catalyze a global discussion around. And so today, we're starting with the four data points. And this morning, we're going to be dealing with two of them: accelerating ecological collapse and instability and turbulence at every level of human affairs. Our predicament is that we have more power than ever before in history. And never before in history has more people in more places felt anxiety, depression, stress, and unease. All our power is not making us happier. We're at a moment in history where we have more information and more knowledge by several orders of magnitude, thousands of orders of magnitude, actually, than ever before in history. And yet, we're not more wise. And the situation in which we find ourselves is that, as the most intelligent, or so we think, of all the species, we're prone to delusional, passion-driven, self-destructive actions. We want to ponder that today. And we want to ponder it in the spirit of something that Mr. Gorbachev said when we were at the Council of Foreign Relations in May of 1992. I had the great privilege, as many of you know, of meeting Mr. Gorbachev and working with him and Jane Goodall and a variety of people during the State of the World Forum days between 1995 and the year 2000. And in May of 1992, we arranged for him to come to the United States. And he was at the Council on Foreign Relations. And as you remember in your history, he had been forced to resign in December of 1991 to the shock of the entire world. We got to the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City in May. He addressed the council, and when he was done, Henry Kissinger was there. And Kissinger, as the dean of the council, was called upon to ask the first question. And he said, "Mr. Gorbachev, I have a single question for you today. Why did you fall?" And the whole room gasped. It's an extraordinary moment. And after a long pause, Mr. Gorbachev said, "Well, I think in the end, I fell and was forced to resign because I did not analyze reality ruthlessly enough." And over the next several hours, in that spirit, we want to conduct a conversation about the code red issues that are challenging humanity in fundamental ways. Climate change, genocide, thermonuclear war, our cruelty to other species, the challenges of Gen Zs, the effects of social media. Knowing that this does not exhaust the list of code red issues, but highlights the different dimensions of our crisis in terms of humanity's relationship with the environment, humanity's relationship with itself, humanity's relationship with other species, and humanity's relationship to technology. We begin with probably the most urgent, pervasive, and critical challenge. And that is the challenge of our collapsing biodiversity and environment. And I would like to begin by calling upon Osprey Orielle Lake, very old friend of mine, someone who I've respected and admired for many decades, originally an artist who became passionate around the environment and founded the Women's Environmental Network, Climate Action Network, and has been tirelessly working on the various issues related to climate. She's been attending all the Conference of Parties in different parts of the world. She just got back from Brazil. Osprey, thank you, first of all, for everything that you've done and are doing, with a particular emphasis, by the way, everyone, to empowering Indigenous women who in a fundamental way have been on the front lines of the climate action that is required. So let's begin. Osprey, you just got back from Benin, from the Amazon. Give us a report on what took place and what the failures and successes were, and then we'll go from there.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Jim, and the whole team who've put this amazing conference together. It's just really an honor to be here. So first, thank you for that and the beautiful opening prayer from the grandmother this morning. So I'll begin by saying that since you asked about the COP, many of us, including myself, don't participate in the COP thinking that this is where the crisis will be resolved. I think it's really important to say that. 30 COPs later, we can see that the COP space is severely compromised, with many of the wealthiest governments refusing to strongly declare and act upon a fossil fuel phase out, which is what we really need. And at this COP in Brazil, there were over 1,600 fossil fuel lobbyists. So this is also hugely problematic, who's in that space. But we do go to the COPs as civil society, as climate vulnerable countries, to stop really bad things from getting worse and to hold governments accountable. And we're able to meet with policymakers face to face at every level of government, and that's really important. Really big passion of mine is to work with scalable climate solutions, indigenous knowledge systems, as you mentioned, Jim, women's leadership and climate justice frameworks, and these worldviews and analyses that really operate outside of business as usual in the sort of colonized, overconsumptive, capitalistic frameworks. And really, how do we translate these actionable practices into real-time policies to subvert the current march of this death machine? And so one way I view the COP is that it's sort of a cutting edge space for real-time world making. And this is really important at this critical moment, as you've been saying, because another aspect of this is that the wealthy elite are really consolidating their power right now. And they're really aware not only of the escalating climate crisis, but the overall biodiversity crisis. And in short, the wealthy elite are planning to wall themselves off and attempt to survive the poly crisis in their gilded, closed-off communities that we're not a part of. And at COP30, they were working again to revert the dialogue back to only reducing carbon emissions so that they can keep the fossil fuel expansion agenda going forward. And this is obviously completely detrimental to life on Earth. There were a couple of promising things that happened at COP30, which I want to share in a moment, but I really wanted to get down to, as you said, looking at the stark reality of the moment and get really clear about where we're at, because we're in such an amazing turning point for humanity, which is going to lead us to incredible promise or immense peril. And the stakes just couldn't be higher. The most recent emissions gap report 2025 shows that even if all current national promises from the Paris Climate Agreement are fully honored, the world will still be on course for a 2.3 to 2.5 C warming. And under current policies, meaning where we're at right now, because people are not moving at the speed we should, we could reach 2.8 C. And all of this is completely catastrophic. These are overshoots that are unlivable. And this trajectory will lead to devastating futures of dramatic sea level rise, collapsing food yields, just unlivable heat, mass displacement of people, and we could go on, and further systemic inequities. And these conditions are really actually already here for many people. So just this past week, we've seen a climate crisis-driven tropical storm that devastated large parts of Sumatra. There's already been 700 confirmed dead. The disaster has affected over 3 million people, entire villages, thousands of homes, infrastructure, farmland, all have been washed away or destroyed. And this is just one climate disaster from this year, just one. And it illustrates how what we call climate disasters are really interlocking ecological, social, and economical crises. So I just can't stress enough that we're standing at the fault line of history and that the planet is already breaking. We've crossed 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries, and every degree of warming literally is a wound inflicted on forests, oceans, ice, and human communities alike. And in this context, we really need to remember again that the world's richest corporations and governments have built their wealth on fossil fuel addiction and domination, and they're just not going to stop on their own. So we really need to organize and fight back because our very lives depend on it, our children, and all the species of the earth. And it's really just not also about reducing CO2. This is about defending ecological systems from collapse, forests that breathe life into the earth, rivers that are the water of life, the soils that sustain our food. And as I see it, we need to treat the climate crisis as a symptom of deeper interlocking crises that are racial, economic, ecological, and spiritual. It's rooted in an ideology of supremacy that treats the land, life, water, and people as disposable, especially Indigenous, Black, and Brown communities and communities in the Global South. And this sort of extraction from the world has been absolutely detrimental. And I'll just close by briefly mentioning 4 highlights from the COP that I wanted to surface here that are sort of on the other end of the spectrum, because we walked away with fossil fuels not being even mentioned in the closing outcome documents, which is really outrageous if you think about that being the source of the problem. So just 4 highlights to close out. One, I'm really honored to be on the steering committee of something called the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is a complementary mechanism to the Paris Agreement that exists outside of that UNFCCC space, which is a framework for countries to actually get down to the business of phasing out fossil fuels. 18 countries have endorsed the treaty thus far, and at COP30, as I mentioned, fossil fuel phase out was tragically removed from the final negotiating texts. But Colombia stepped forward with Netherlands and announced a conference in April 2026 that will fully focus on phase out, and only countries ready to move will have a seat at that table. And this is a major breakthrough because no matter how many discoveries we make or solutions we practice, or all the work we're doing with ourselves to move our consciousness, which is so massively important, and we must carry out this work, it won't stop the source of climate collapse quickly. We need coal, gas, and oil out. We're not going to be able to carry out the next step as a human community if we don't do this work. So stopping fossil fuels must be factored into everyone's forward thinking and plans. Secondly, at COP30, countries did adopt something called the Just Transition Action Mechanism, which was very hard fought for by civil society and some countries. And we won that at COP. And that's really vital because within that mechanism, we were able to get into the text Indigenous rights, gender responsive policies, and equitable transition off of fossil fuels. It didn't hit the headlines, but it's a really big win, and we can build on that. Thirdly, rights of nature gained a lot of momentum at COP30, with now over 39 countries engaged in rights of nature legislations, and some recent major wins from mountains and lakes and rivers now being recognized as rights-bearing entities. And this is essential if we're going to protect the climate and biodiversity. And I know we'll talk about that a little later in our conversation, but this is critical work that had really surfaced at this COP. And then lastly, at Weekend, we're really honored to work with many Indigenous women globally, as you've mentioned, Jim, and they are leading many of our programs. And at COP30, we met with our Indigenous women partners from Brazil, who were very clear over the last 2 years that COP30 needed to take place in the Amazon. That the Amazon is at a critical tipping point. It is also a unique biome that the entire world depends on ecologically and in many other ways. And the women wanted the world to hear the voice of the forest. and the voice of the indigenous peoples who are calling for the protection of the Amazon that is under major attacks from extractive industries. And I find it also very profound that the origin of the renewal of the State of the World Forum came from a call from the Amazon. And at COP30, the indigenous women also shared with us that they wanted us in the Amazon, the largest rainforest in the world, because it is time for the people of the world to reforest our minds. They said to us, we are not here only to negotiate, but to remember. Reforesting the mind is an invitation, they told us, to undo the clear-cut logic that governs modern systems, the belief that separation is natural, that extraction is progress, that the future can be postponed. To reforest the mind is to allow relationship, reciprocity, and responsibility to be remembered and implemented. And so I think that was really the big mandate from the Amazon, is to reforest our minds at a time where we are literally on the brink of this massive breakdown that many of us are already experiencing in different parts of the world. And so, yes, I leave you with that, Jim. And as you said, we have to look these things squarely on if we are going to manage our way out of very serious crises.
Thank you, Osprey. Reforesting our mind. I love that because that is so true. We're in this predicament because the consciousness that produced the problem can't solve it. And nothing less than the reforestation of the mind, a whole new cognitive ecology will suffice to save us. So we'll circle back to that point in a bit, but I would like now to bring in Ed Muller from Costa Rica. Ed is the director of the International University for Cooperation. He's passionate about regeneration and has been doing an extraordinary amount there in Costa Rica to animate the biodiversity. So, Ed, what would be your comment on what Osprey just laid out? As you've been in so many conferences over the years. I know from previous conversations you've despaired at what conferences can achieve. What would be your comment on what just happened in the COP in Benin and just sort of generally on the climate issue?
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for inviting me to this. You're always inviting me to exciting stuff. I'll never say no to you. The thing is, this is not a climate crisis. We're not in a climate crisis, nor environmental. We're in a civilization crisis. Our civilization is collapsing. I mean, sustainability, just that word, is obsolete. It meant having future generations have a chance to live, and right now they don't. And yes, Osprey mentioned the focus on reducing future emissions, and yes, it's necessary. But as Larry Copel says, a good friend of mine, he says, nothing of what we're seeing has ever been caused by future emissions. So we're missing a point there. And that point is when we talk about disasters. Yes, last year we had 600 events, and out of those, 150 were extreme events that had never been recorded. And Osprey just mentioned a few that are happening this year already. We saw Jamaica. I mean, but people look at, the damage of cars, the damage of houses, maybe some human loss, but nobody ever mentions that with all these huge floods, very few wildlife species can survive. With the hurricanes, we see, the yachts on the streets in Miami. How many birds can survive winds of 200, 250, 300 kilometers per hour? So we're missing the point that in my lifetime, we've destroyed life. And in my lifetime, in less than my lifetime, in 50 years, we've destroyed over 70% of biodiversity abundance. In Latin America, it's up to 95, actually now 96, because we're losing 1% every 4 years. And the last report was from 2020. I ask people in audiences who scraped their windshield recently to get the insects off. Because when I was a kid, you had to stop on a road trip several times to scrape the insects off. What about the fireflies? When did you see the last field lit up by fireflies? I took a friend yesterday up to the forest. Actually, it was a kind of like a mixture of teak on one side and forest on the other. But still, we were able to look at an amazing amount of little insects on every single flower, everyone playing a role. And we're just missing that point. And it's not lack of information. I mean, we produce more knowledge, more data, more information every year than all the previous years together. But we've forgotten one thing, to put that into wisdom. Wisdom is what actually brings all of this together in a holistic way. For example, soil. Soil is not in the discussions in the COPs. And I'm talking about living soil, which is a center. It's a center for human health. It's a center for ecosystem health. It's a center for animal health. And it's just not on the charts. It's not in the planetary boundaries. And this is because one of our biggest challenges, it's not humans and nature. It's humans are nature. Nature has been shaped by the relationship with humans. The nature we currently have on the planet. The Amazon is a forest that was created by humans. The Mesoamerican forests are forests that were created by humans. And when we talk about nature in the Western worldview, it's like something that's out there that we have to protect. We don't see ourselves as nature. And as long as we don't find that connection, it will be very difficult. And this comes from the reductionist approach since the Greeks. One hypothesis and one answer is the scientific method. And there are thousands of questions and thousands of answers, and they're all dynamic. Then the other thing is it's exponential change, and we're not trained to work exponentially. So how can we actually move forward, digest something like the COPs, which have been useless, and stop believing, for example, what's wrong? We are accepting that we're putting poison on our food. We're accepting that we're putting 4,000 artificial ingredients in our food. And we're not saying, we're accepting GDP as a measurement of development, which is ridiculous. And the most difficult thing for all of us is the ability to unlearn. Unless we can unlearn, we won't be able to move forward. So one, we have to stop thinking of mechanistic solutions and start understanding that we need to expand, as you mentioned in your first intervention, the deep consciousness that we are one with nature. And if we learn through nature, and biomimicry is a good tool for that, we can also engage with indigenous knowledge, that the sharing of different knowledge sources is fundamental. But if we do not create conditions for life, we're dead. No matter how many electric cars we can put on the street, no matter how many solar panels we can put on the street, we are already in biodiversity collapse. And without biodiversity, we don't exist. So it's enough of tolerating corporates reducing their damage. It's enough of having an environmental impact assessment that can allow you legally to do less damage. It's enough to have these companies do whatever they want. And we just have to accept it. We cannot bother them because otherwise they won't cooperate. BS, I'm sorry. We have to change this around. And either we start shifting into a holistic approach. And for example, I'll challenge, CO2 is our best ally. It's not the enemy. It's the fuel for photosynthesis. It's the only mechanism that the nature has evolved that brought CO2 from thousands of parts per million in the atmosphere to what we had pre-industrial age. That was photosynthesis. There is no machine. And you look at the carbon markets. Carbon for a mechanical machine capturing carbon is enormously more money than the carbon paid for forests and for soil carbon capture. That's absurd. We're not going to solve this through technology. So we need to create conditions for life. And that is, I think, my major focus now. I don't care about the carbon market. I care about bringing life back. And if we're not understanding that we are part of that very, very tightly, we won't solve it. This is not a mechanistic thing. This won't be solved from the fourth floor of a glass building of a university.
Thank you, Ed. Those were powerful words, and I will be bringing both Osprey and Ed back in later to talk more about the rights of nature from Osprey, and also for Ed to talk about a world mycelium learning network that he and colleagues from around the world are initiating, which will be one of the strategic initiatives of the State of the World Forum. So thank you for that passionate statement that it's enough already, everybody. It's enough already. It is enough already. So thank you, Ed. I'd like to turn now to an issue that is probably of all the code red issues, the most challenging to talk about, because it is the question of genocide. If you think about what Osprey and Ed just talked about in terms of what we're doing to the environment, and as Ed just pointed out, we got over 4,000 different chemicals we're putting in our food. And we consider this normal. What's going on in Gaza with the genocide of the Palestinian people who have been there, according to DNA studies, for well over 10,000 years, back before the Neolithic Revolution. Is a crime of crimes. And I think we all know that. And I want to say a couple things just as a preliminary statement before bringing in our commentator, and that is, it's very easy to confuse the genocide with ethnicity, to even raise the issue. One is labeled as anti-Semitic. But to address genocide anywhere is not anti-Semitic or anti-anything else. It's to address a problem as glaring as climate change that must be addressed. And it's important to point out that a significant percentage of those that are the most committed to speaking out about the genocide are Jewish, not just Palestinians, not just people from around the world. So we're dealing with a very complex issue in which an ideology has taken over a country and inspired it to commit crimes against humanity. And the magnitude of what we're dealing with when we're dealing with the genocide in Gaza by the Israelis in the United States against the Palestinian people has been identified first by Gabor Mate, Hungarian of Jewish descent, lost most of his family during the Holocaust. And he speaks strongly about the agony that he feels that his people who endured the Holocaust are now inflicting a Holocaust simply because they don't want to share the land. And he calls it one of the greatest crimes in the history of the Jewish people. It's also important to cite Yuval Harari, an Israeli, Jewish Israeli, who says that it's certainly true that Israel has the right to exist. Israel does not have the right to starve 2 million people and expel them from their land. And he speaks of what's happening as Israel and the United States are gripped by the Zionist ideology as a turning on its head the entire last 2,000 years of rabbinic Judaism. So, like with the issue of climate change, where we have been brought to the brink of an ecological spasm that could well take out certainly human civilization as we know it, if not the human species. So when we talk about the genocide in Gaza, we're talking about a crime of crimes that is hard to fathom, simply because one group of people don't want to share land. They believe it's theirs. We all know most of the statistics of what's happened over the last several years. But one that breaks my heart every time I reflect on it is that the majority of Palestinians, over 50%, are young people, Gen Zs, Gen Alpha, and that the overwhelming majority of people that have been killed and maimed and injured beyond belief with no medical care, no sanitation, no heat, no food, no electricity, have been women and children and the elderly. It's hard to look this in the eye, but look the genocide in the eye, we must, in the spirit of ruthless realism, as a code red issue of our time from our heart. And it's in this spirit I want to bring in a Palestinian woman, a Gen Z, who got her BA degree in public policy from the University of Chicago, and she's been working with Code Pink. And I want to mention Code Pink. If there's one organization out there, everyone, who's been on the front lines of justice, calling to our attention issues we easily turn our eyes away from, it's Code Pink. So I want to acknowledge Code Pink and Jody Evans and Medea Benjamin and the women who've initiated it. And to thank you, Jenin, for everything that you've been doing. And I want to just ask you, as a young Palestinian woman, just speak to us about what's happening to your people in Gaza and the West Bank.
Well, thank you so much, Jim, for having me. Thank you to the State of the World Forum for having me and inviting, I mean, I'm coming here as like a representative of Code Pink, but also just inviting like a Palestinian to talk on this topic. I feel like for a long time we've had a lot of other people who aren't us telling our own story about our homeland, about our massacres and pain, but also trying to wash away like the true deep rooted love that we have for our land and our culture. So I'm just honestly like I'm honored to be here, and I'm also really happy that we're now in a space where Palestinians can tell their own story because that really wasn't the case just 2 years ago. You know what I mean? So, thank you for uh, providing that space. I guess just a little intro onto who I am and what work I do before I go into talking about Gaza and the activism that has been done around that, especially, at my age. I'm only 23, so I've haven't lived much life, but the life that I have lived, um, I've tried to, root myself in Palestinian work for as long as I have been doing. My name is Jenin. I'm Code Pink's Palestine campaigner. If anyone here is not familiar with Code Pink is a feminist grassroots organization that began in 2005. And we're working to end US warfare and imperialism. We support peace and human rights initiatives, and we redirect resources into healthcare, education, green jobs, and other life-affirming programs. So, as a Palestine campaigner, I do all that I can to organize Code Pink's campaign against Israeli and U.S. aggression, occupation, and genocide of Palestine and its people. Because obviously, what's happening in Palestine is not just enacted by the Israeli government. It's very much a U.S.-Israeli project, to kind of wipe away Palestine. The U.S. is giving billions of dollars to Israel every year. The U.S. is sending over tons and tons of military cargo to Israel every year, and they are joint forces in the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. So we do a lot of work here at Code Pink for Palestine, and we that really ramped up obviously after October 7th. Um, I think, maybe like I could just ground you all in the moment that we are in right now, and the work that has to be done beyond this moment as well. So, after October 7th, it was a very the genocide began, and it was a very urgent moment where a lot of people got into board, especially people my age. Um, there's a lot of student organizing that was happening, but it was obviously very apparent that like what happened on October 7th did not happen in a vacuum. That obviously Palestine has been undergoing an ethnic cleansing project for 76 years, since 1948, you know? And that's unfortunately the stain on Palestine, is that we've been undergoing a Nakba, or a catastrophe, for 76, almost 78 years now, where in 1948, 750,000 Palestinians were displaced from their land, and thousands were killed and massacred, and we're still living in the aftermath of that. So right now, in Gaza, there is this supposed ceasefire deal, and it's really, really important for all of us to push back against these colonial efforts that are trying to continue the colonization of a land that's been happening since 1948. Because obviously, what we can see here is that over the past 2 years, Gaza has been decimated. Over 90% of its infrastructure is completely gone. Um, and we can have a debate over how many people have been murdered, but it's definitely well over 100,000 Palestinians that have been murdered by Israeli and US military weapons and military personnel. And Gaza's population before October 7th, 2023, was already more than half of adolescents. So all those people that have been murdered were more likely mostly children. So innocent civilians have been slaughtered essentially on the first live streamed ever genocide, and it's still ongoing. The ceasefire deal that has happened, Palestinians are still being killed every single day. There are still Israeli forces on the ground in Gaza, and Israel has made it clear that they are restricting their borders or their yellow lines and essentially just stealing more and more land in the Gaza Strip. Because whenever you have a ceasefire deal that's constructed by a bunch of fascist colonial leaders like Donald Trump and Tony Blair, it's obvious that there's an agenda there. And it's obvious that the reason why Israel carried out this genocide was that so it can kill Palestinians and steal their land with impunity. And this ceasefire deal is essentially just another manifestation of that. So I just wanted to ground you all in that, in that statement that, Palestinians are still undergoing a genocide, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. We have children being imprisoned illegally. There are over 400 Palestinian children in Israeli prisons right now, and that's very much illegal. We have people being imprisoned for no crimes, and Israeli prisons are some of the most dangerous prisons in the world. They are torture chambers. And the UN actually just came out with a report on how after post October 7th, the conditions in Israeli prisons are are just very grotesque and very inhumane. Um, and so the restrictions in the West Bank are terrible. The settler violence in the West Bank, the illegal settler violence and the expansion that is happening in the West Bank is also another manifestation of colonial powers trying to steal Palestinian land and kill Palestinians without any impunity. And I'm saying this as someone who's from the West Bank. I'm from Hebron, and that's one of the most there are many, many settlements around that city, and the settler violence increases every single day. Settlers will literally just come onto like main roads and just start hitting Palestinian cars and trying to, just like fearmonger Palestinians wherever they can. So there's many forms of genocide that's happening in Palestine right now, and it's something that we should never turn a blind eye to. The past 2 years we've been working on a very urgent basis. And obviously that's valid because we don't like seeing people being killed, but we also need to think strategically about how we really, you know, stop what's happening in Palestine, how we stop these powers that are engaging in like a worldwide project, it seems, to rid Palestine off of the map and Palestinians off of the map, and also the Palestinian movement off of the map. And I really appreciate the intersection here between the Palestinian movement and the environmentalist movement, because what has happened in Gaza is a clear contributor to climate change right now, and the way that our planet looks right now. Like over 70,000 to over 100,000 tons of explosives have been dropped on the Gaza Strip, which is more than Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. And the effects ecologically that has had on the people of Gaza, on Palestine, on the region, on the world, I don't think like we will be able to know until years later, but it's very harmful. So there are many, like there's genocide on so many fronts, you know what I mean? There's ecological genocide, there's scholasticide. Cousins are not being able to have education. Children are being denied life. Like it's on many fronts. And so obviously like at Code Pink we try to think of like strategic ways that we can move Americans forward in the path of Palestinian liberation. And Jim, you mentioned like kind of the Gen Z aspect of it all. And I think the reason like I am a part of Generation Z, and I don't think I'm necessarily in this movement. I think it's because I'm young and because I have like revolutionary optimism that, hopefully I will be able to live on my land one day while it's free. But it's also because obviously I'm Palestinian, but I think like the young people now, the Generation Z now, we are reaping the consequences of years of industrialization, of hypercapitalism, and I honestly feel like what's happened in the past 2 years is like a breaking point in our society. There are so many different different like walls crashing on us, whether that's economically, politically, socially. And I think Palestine was one of those breaking points. And it also made us realize how much more needs to be done in order for us to live, meaningful, and like equitable lives. You know what I mean? So I think social media had a huge role to play in that. And that's why we're seeing even Benjamin Netanyahu himself come out and say that um, he wants to win on the TikTok war, and that's why he's paying influencers $7,000 to talk about Israel on TikTok, because TikTok was actually like a really good caveat for people to learn about Palestine and to engage in activism for Palestine. And that's why we're seeing, it, may possibly being sold to AI companies like Oracle or like Palantir having an influence on these sorts of things. So it's all connected in a way where it's, these these fascist leaders who want to engage in ethnic cleansing and imperialism are using like techno-fascism, to like subdue the youth population um who are fighting for people's movements like Palestine that are essentially like I honestly consider the Palestine movement to be a movement for everything else as well because it encompasses everything. It encompasses Black liberation, it encompasses ecological liberation, it encompasses immigrant liberation, feminist liberation, all these sorts of things. So I think that's also why it's so appealing to the youth is because of that intersectionality. So kind of the solution that I always try to talk about is that we need to continue to work. We need to push boundaries strategically, and no revolutionary change will ever happen in the confines of our own comfort. So, you know, let's think outside the box. Let's, not organize in the parameters that people who don't want us to organize made for us. Um, and you can always take action with Code Pink. We do a lot of work. Right now we're doing work um we're doing a lot of work ranging from banning Israel from the soccer federations in Europe to freeing political prisoners like Marwan Barghouti in the West Bank. So, and obviously like bird dogging all the Congress people in America who are giving our tax dollars to genocide. So, um that's kind of
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you. Powerful,
Thank you.
powerful, Jenin, that for you as a 23-year-old to carry this level of suffering on behalf of your people, given what's going on, is quite extraordinary. And I just want to honor you. One thing to explain, you mentioned Hudsa. Uh, uh,
What is it?
you said in the Hudsa zone.
Oh, is it the yellow line?
Yeah, Hudsa is that, and I didn't know exactly what you meant by that,
I
but
think it I
not
think I
the
meant
word.
I think I said Hebron.
Oh, okay,
I don't
okay,
know. Yeah, I
good.
think so.
Well, good. Well, listen, thank you for this statement, and we'll circle back. And what I would say, everyone, is I know that this is controversial. Most of what we're going to talk about today is controversial. And there are many people that don't believe that climate change is real. But ecological collapse is real. There are many people who believe that there are many sides to what's happening in Palestine. But the fact that there's a genocide going on and ethnic cleansing is real. And we have to look this in the eye. we want to now turn, and we're going to circle back to these discussions when we finish the presentations, but we want to, again, just to take in what we humans are doing to each other and to the environment and to other species at this time. This is fundamental for any kind of redemption that we seek, that we have to acknowledge the code red issues that characterize our age in unprecedented severity. And the next one we want to talk to is the issue of what we're doing to other sentient beings, to the animals around us, because that's the same mentality that is destroying the environment and committing genocide, is the mentality that is sacrificing tens, if not hundreds of thousands of animals every year for scientific research. And this came to my attention as I was talking with Jason Bayless, the founder of Radical Guide, who has been helping us identify various Gen Zs from around the world in terms of what he's been doing in working on the issue of cruelty to animals. So, Jason, I want to thank you for joining us today, and just take a few minutes just to describe the situation out there in terms of what humans are doing to animals.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thanks for holding the space. But before I get in, I do want to just take a moment, because we've been in on this a while. We've been putting kind of the weight of the world in conversation, talking about code red, and just sit with what we're feeling right now and not reject it, but really embrace what we're feeling, whether you agree or disagree with what you're hearing or what you're hearing. Because I think the reason I said yes to this conversation is because it's not pitting us against ideas or each other. It's coming together so we can talk about what is our lives, what is our lived experiences that we're experiencing in this crisis, and how can we come together to find that third way. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that, to hear the voices that have preceded me and that we'll hear throughout this event, and acknowledge and honor that for a second. So take a breath. And then when I was asked to come to this space to talk about the state of the world around cruelty to animals, I reflected on the fact that it's often treated as a side issue, something that we'll get to after we fix war, climate, and democracy. But I'm here, I want to suggest something opposite. I want to say the way that we treat animals, the way that our system treats animals is one of the clearest mirrors that we have for what has gone wrong and what has changed. So I'm going to share some numbers, and if you want the statistics of where I got these, feel free to reach out to me. I'll put the website in the chat, and I'll give you where I got these stats from. But I just want to presence what is true for the lived experience of animals throughout the world. So right now, every year, 85 billion land animals are killed for food. And if you think about that, I mean, that's such a huge number to think about. 85 billion with a B land animals are killed for food every year. That's more than 10 times the number of humans on this planet. And if we include fish, that number becomes even harder to grasp. That number jumps up to roughly around 124 billion farmed fish animals and over 2 trillion wild fish who are killed annually. And then on top of that, tens of millions of animals are used in laboratory experimentations worldwide every year, with many saying that the number's over 100 million when you include species that are not counted in the official studies. So those are huge numbers. That's what we do every year to animals. So when we talk about code red, animals are already living inside that. On top of these overwhelming numbers, it's also directly tied to ecological collapse. For example, factory farming, as you probably already know, accounts for, on conservative numbers, 15% of human-caused greenhouse gas emissions. It's a major driver of deforestation, water pollution, and biodiversity loss. So with all this number and all this information, for me, the crisis isn't what we're doing. It's what we've all agreed to believe in order to make this normal. To run systems like factory farms and animal experimentations, you have to build a culture where it seems reasonable to have some beings exist only to be used up. This type of thinking turns individuals into objects and leads us to believe that this is the rational way to organize our lives. In addition, cruelty to animals is one of the earliest places that we're taught to normalize control, normalize strength over weaknesses, normalize cages and experiments and slaughterhouses as it's unnecessary. It's unfortunate but necessary. These early teachings and trainings ground us for accepting life, accepting that life, people, and things who don't look like us are disposable. And once a society accepts that millions or billions of beings can be treated as disposable, it becomes much easier for us to extend that logic to humans, to poor people, to migrants, to communities under occupation, and to anybody classified as less valuable. So if we're serious about a new paradigm, about bringing human nature, artificial and cosmic intelligence into the right relationship, we can't keep animals outside of the frame as scenery or resources. Their suffering is not an unfortunate side effect of progress. It is the direct consequences of the worldview that we're here to examine. So in this, what I'm bringing to this conversation and what I would encourage us when we get to the larger space is, what would it look like and what would it mean if we organized our economies, our food systems, our science, and our technologies around the idea that no one is disposable? Thank you for listening.
Ooh-wee. That was powerful, Jason. I hadn't known those data points about how many animals are sacrificed every year for human consumption or human research. That's a sobering thought to take in, everyone. That's a very sobering thought. And I know, Jason, you've had a particular interest in the beagles. That's how you got into the domain. And just quickly, just something about the situation with the beagles, these beautiful little dogs that many of us have as pets.
Yeah, in animal experimentation, laboratories around the world, not just in the US, beagles are the preferred animals to do horrible animal testing, vivisection, all different types of testing, because they're such forgiving and docile creatures. They're less likely to lash out because they're such gentle, loving creatures. Our collective mindset said, well, let's use them in testing that they're cut open, they're dissected. I won't go into details. You can research and watch all the videos on there. But I do want to drive home the thing is, like, in animal testing, they don't use drugs, they don't use painkillers, they don't use most of the time they don't use anesthesia or anything that removes the pain from their experience, because those drugs, they say, will affect what they're testing. So most all animal testing are done when the animal is fully conscious, can feel the full extent of what we're doing to them. And just to add the level to it, that they are consciously bringing in beagles because they're gentle, docile, loving animals is just blows my mind. It blows my mind that we are able, that we've crafted our society in a way that we can view others as lesser, and that gives us the permission to do whatever we want in the name of progress.
Yeah, that's what motivates genocide.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what
I think
motivates ecocide.
yeah,
That
it's the same
whatever the
thread,
other
it's the same
is
view.
subordinate. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And that's
Thank
where
you,
we need to
Jason.
change. Thank you so much. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You carry deep compassion for life, my friend. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
We now want to turn to a Gen Z from Nepal, from Kathmandu, Dr. Aditi Pajiyar, who was involved with the Gen Z protests earlier this year that toppled the Nepalese government for corruption. And so, Aditi, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your courage, like Jenin Madhi. We're delighted, by the way, everyone, to have so many Gen Zs as part of our program. We wanted to make this as multi-generational as absolutely possible. So when I was introduced to Aditi, I realized that, wow, we have an extraordinary spirit and articulate spokesperson for what Gen Zs around the world are experiencing as they take in everything that we're now doing as a society. You know, they're bearing witness to the climate change. They're bearing witness to the genocide in Gaza. They're bearing witness to our cruelty to animals and other dimensions of Code Red. So we're very interested in how they're speaking out. So Aditi, tell us about what you folks have been doing there in Nepal, and then we'll have follow-up discussion.
Thank you so much, Jim, for the warm welcome. And I'm grateful to the entire State of the World Forum, particularly Nina and you, Jim, for inviting me in this platform. Representing the Gen Z of Nepal. My name is Aditi Pajiyar, and I am a Gen Z doctor who first-handedly witnessed what a government does to its own citizen when the citizens want to speak their voices, want themselves to make heard to the government. So the answer to what happened in Nepal does not lie in the streets of Kathmandu, but in the life of an average Nepali. Let's take an example of Ram. He is a 25-year-old fresh graduate without employment. His father works in the Middle East, risking his life so that he can provide for his family back home. His homemaker mother is worried about her husband and her children. Ram is feeling very hopeless and helpless in the situation he is currently, and also worries about the future of his sibling in a nation where his own present was hanging in balance. His only job is to desperately look for a job. He goes every day out searching for it, comes home, scrolls on social media, vents out his frustration, and sleeps. And the cycle goes on every day. Majority of people in Nepal are digitalized to a lot extent. About 48 to 50% of Nepalese citizens have their social media accounts. So they go to work, come home, scroll, and sleep. Their dissatisfaction never fully disappears. It just gets absorbed through social media. And in those social media platforms, there were thousands of social media posts with images of politicians' children living flashy, glamorous lifestyles, flashing their European vacations, luxurious homes and cars and clothes that left the young Nepali and people in general of Nepal outraged in a nation where an average Nepali earns about just $1,400 per year, where 1 in 5 young people like Ram is unemployed, where 1 in 4 live below the poverty line, and yet the children of elites thrive even without trying, without any hardship. And just then, on September 4, the government decided to ban 26 social media platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, X, WhatsApp, among many more, saying that those platforms didn't comply with the latest registration bill passed by the government. So young people like Ram felt that it was an effort from the government to silence them. Those were not just mere social media apps, they were medias of communication for people like Ram to the family outside the nation. For those were the sources of news and those were the sources of employment like businesses as well. So, if you remove the distraction from everyone at once, something very different happens. You are not just taking away a drug from a person, you are forcing an entire population into withdrawal together. When people are not distracted, then they pay attention towards the injustices happening around them, and that's what happened to the people of Nepal. They started to focus on the systemic failures of our government, the bigger issues like corruption being the primary one. And looking at that, the state had not fixed the underlying issues. It had simply dampened them with a constant stream of digital noise. And now, suddenly, with the social media ban, that noise was gone. Millions of people had the same irritation at the same time. Not abstract frustration, but a concrete, visible act from the government that touched the daily life of millions. Everyone's screen had become a tiny little protest poster. So the protest was not just against censorship, it was against corruption, nepotism, inequality, and social injustice. So, what happened next was not a movie. It was messy, it was terrifying, but it was necessary. On September 8th, thousands gathered at Maitigar Mandala and outside Parliament. Students in school uniforms, recent graduates with no job prospects, young workers with nothing left to lose. And the state responded with water cannons, then tear gas, then rubber bullets, followed by live ammunition, which killed 19 people that day, the youngest being a 12-year-old whose brain was literally being displayed in the protest, eviscerated from the skull, and that fueled literally enraged millions of people watching it across social media platform as well as live. Saying this is making me shiver right now, sorry. So enraged by this bloody police crackdown, the protesters took over the capital the next day, setting fire to the parliament, Supreme Court, and other government buildings on September 9. The call was also being somehow hijacked by the opportunists as well. We had never imagined that the protest would escalate this far. Buildings carry history, I know. I understand the rise of young people who felt the structures that were meant to support them had become the instruments of their oppression. And following that protest, within 36 hours, the Prime Minister had resigned and the government fell, creating a power vacuum, after which the Nepal army took temporary control in hands. Within 4 days, the former Supreme Court Justice, Susila Karki ma'am, the first woman to ever lead Nepal, was sworn as the interim Prime Minister. And the fact that she was chosen through a Discord server, a digital democracy born from the ashes of a systemic failure. My generation watched the older generation in charge to fail address climate disaster, to fail address inequality, to fail address corruption, fail to address the basic dignity of human life, that it encouraged the policeman to fire live ammunition to the armless civilians, let it be the children in the uniforms. And by this protest, it showed to the world that the generation that the world leaders dismissed as distracted, as shallow, as addicted to their phones, this generation has just toppled the government. And in the end, what makes this real is not that everything went according to the plan. It is that almost nothing did, because no one could have ever imagined the death toll reaching up to 76 and more than 2,200 being injured in different hospitals of our country. But it is the fact that almost nothing did, and yet something important shifted. We are now hopeful that the new government, which hopefully might be elected by March, we will get a new leadership free from the corruption, injustices, and which will fulfill our long-term goal of having a sustainable development and healthier Nepal. So yeah, I'm just hopeful.
Aditi, that was powerful, my friend. You know, Aditi was the doctor that helped a lot of the wounded. So when she talks about the brain eviscerated from the skull of a 12-year-old,
Yeah.
that's enough to bring down a government. And it's happened to probably thousands of Palestinians over the last several years, to give one a sense of magnitude. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And I want to just note and then have you respond, Aditi. Then we're going to broaden it and have everybody come into the discussion. Nepal was really, you know, like Columbia University back in 1968 when I was at university against the Vietnam War. It was the first big protest, and then it spread like wildfire. But since Nepal, there have been Gen Z protests in Madagascar and Morocco and Tanzania and Kenya and Mexico City, in the UK, in the US. Most of the Palestinian encampments were Gen Zs until they were shut down, until even yesterday in Bulgaria. So the Gen Zs are on the move, and the Gen Zs are fed up, and the Gen Zs are beginning to organize, and the Gen Zs are carrying the revolution. This is what Thomas Jefferson said, that revolution is the purview of the young. And DT and Jenin and others are the Sulafa last night are the tip of the spear for the human development. So Aditi, before we open it up for a general discussion, just comment on these other revolutionary developments among your generation.
So yeah, Zim, I think the common theme in these revolutionary ideas is the sense of purpose, a sense of unity. And it is like we have the globe at our palm, and when we see some success stories like that, just what happened in Nepal, we get inspired that yes, we can, like when we raise our voice, because every citizen has that power. A single citizen cannot bring a government down to knees, but when a group mobilizes in mass, there is coordination without a coordinator, and there is a momentum without a plan. Everyone is acting on their free will, and that just leads to escalation to that extent that the government has to listen to them, and that becomes inspirational around the world. So the sense of purpose and unity that unites the Gen Zs around the world is the driving force, I would say. And that is definitely the one purpose being, as the issues being discussed, that we are living the climate adversity. We have to deal with the political instability all around the world. We are dealing with the economic stagnation, and we are the generation that is told to work hard, in the generation, in the time where we are not offered opportunities. We are just being told to work hard, but the environment is not sufficient for us to thrive, and we have to work to create such environment together, because yes, we cannot do this all alone. We have to walk together in this path. So I think that
Aditi, Dr. Aditi, thank you so much for your courage and your willingness to articulate so clearly and passionately the challenges and the deep sense of purpose of your generation. It as an old 60s guy, one of the baby boomers who was on the front lines like you are now, back during the Vietnam War and subsequently, I salute you and all your compatriots. So thank you so much. we want to now turn to one final issue, actually, before we open it up to discussion. The issue of the escalating threat of thermonuclear war. This is of particular poignancy for me, since my doctoral dissertation was on this issue. And because of this issue, I spent many, many years in the Soviet Union, working tirelessly to create what was called citizen diplomacy between the Americans and the Soviets at a moment when the world was literally teetering on the brink of mutual assured destruction. I want to note that my principal partner at that time was a man named Jim Hickman. Jim Hickman was the citizen diplomat par excellence. We both worked for the Esalen Institute in their Soviet American exchange program. Jim was a deep and close friend for many, many decades, and we worked together not only during the citizen diplomacy days with the Soviets, but subsequently. And he passed this last March. So I just wanted to note that we've actually dedicated the State of the World Forum to Jim Hickman. And we noted Jane Goodall, who passed recently. Jim was my partner when we did the trip in May of 1992 with Mr. Gorbachev to come to the United States during the State of the World Forum. Jim was constantly at my side, and it was Jim Hickman who all of us acknowledged as our leader in a fundamental way because of his extraordinary intellectual prowess and his courage and his sense of curiosity and delight in the adventure. One of the people that we met and became fast friends with very, very early on the Russian side was Vladimir Posner. And Vladimir is just tuned in from Jordan, of all places, where he's doing a documentary on the Arabs. But it was Vladimir Posner, who was a journalist par excellence then and a journalist par excellence now, one of the most well-known and acclaimed journalists in Russia, and I would say globally over the last 40, 50 years. It's really an extraordinary career. And it was Vladimir, among a few others on the Russian side, that really rose to the occasion and created a magic between committed activists in the United States and Russia to work to bring the Cold War to an end. Then the Soviet Union collapsed, and the situation has destabilized progressively since that bright, shining moment into a situation where virtually all of the nuclear protocols that were negotiated and signed between the United States and the Soviet Union, now Russia, starting with President Kennedy and President Nixon and President Reagan and President Bush Sr., have all been undone. And we now find ourselves locked in a geostrategic rivalry that is both cold but also hot in the battlefields of Ukraine. And so I think it's worth adding to the code red issues the issue of the increasing conflict now geostrategically between the United States and Russia, United States and China, as the geostrategic rivalries escalate the threat of an exchange of nuclear weapons that has caused the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, who've been monitoring the nuclear danger since the beginning of the Cold War, now puts the atomic clock at 89 seconds to midnight. And to give you a measure, everyone, of what this means, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when we came within a hair's breadth of a nuclear exchange, the bulletin put the clock at 7 minutes to midnight. And now we're at 89 seconds. So Code Red characterizes our geostrategic relations and the dangers of nuclear war. So I want to invite my very old and very good friend, Vladimir, to the forum. Thank you, Vladimir. We know you've been traveling and have been various places today. Thank you for tuning in. And take a few minutes and just give us, your perspective, but also the Russian perspective on all of this, so that we can be more enlightened of the current situation.
Thank you very much, Jim. Can you hear me? I just want to make sure.
Yeah.
Can. Okay.
Very well.
I'd like to, first of all, say that there is a Russian perspective, which is to say the official viewpoint of the government, and then, of course, I have my own, and the two don't necessarily coincide. So I'll try to make it clear where it doesn't. I think we're probably at the most dangerous point in our mutual relationship since the end of the Cold War, which was basically 1989. And I'd like to kind of review the development since then. When Gorbachev came to power in March of 1985, nobody knew what he was going to do. Nobody had the faintest idea that he would revolutionize the state of affairs. It became clear very gradually. And by 1988 and 1989, it was clear that the Soviet Union had changed and that the relationship with the West, and in particular with the United States, was one that the Soviet leadership, that is to say Gorbachev, wanted not only to improve, but to cement and to have a real partnership. I remember Gorbachev arriving in New York, people standing on their cars, on roofs, hanging out of balconies, yelling, "Gorby, Gorby, Gorby." There was a sense that finally the world would be a different kind of place. Finally, we could live without fear of being blown to pieces. This had finally happened. And Gorbachev was getting out of his car, as the politicians say, to press the flesh, much to the dismay of the protection around him, because, there was a huge crowd. But anyway, that was really the beginning of a completely new relationship. What happened inside Russia, why Gorbachev failed in his presidency, was a domestic issue. And I'm not going to get into that because it really had nothing to do with the relationship between the United States and Russia. What's more, the next president, Boris Yeltsin, was basically pursuing the same goal. And when Jim, or the two Jims, should I say, brought Yeltsin to the United States in 1992, and he addressed the Congress of the United States. And he stretched out his hand and he said, "I'm stretching out my hand in the name of the Russian people. We want to be your partners." And he got a standing ovation. And of course, he understood that should this happen, Russia would be a junior partner at that time, because Russia was much weaker than the Soviet Union and could not be on equal footing. But yet the desire to be part of what you might call the Western world was very clear. And if you look at the entire period from Gorbachev to the end of the Yeltsin period, which is the year 2000, I think it'll be difficult for you to find anything, any decision, any statement on the part of the Soviet/Russians that would somehow be seen as negative, as be seen as going back to the Soviet times, to be seen as wanting to conquer the world and so on. On the contrary. So there was a huge window of opportunity during a relatively long period. And of course, when the Soviet Union broke up, and instead of having one country, you had 15 independent countries, the United States had to figure out, how do we deal with these countries? And of course, by far the most important was Russia, by far the largest, the most powerful, the one with nuclear weapons, and so on and so forth. And I believe that at that moment, when the Soviet flag came down over the Kremlin on the 26th of December, 1991, and the Russian flag went up, 2 weeks, no, maybe 4 weeks later, a document was put on President Bush's table in the Oval Office that came to be called the Wolfowitz Doctrine, which was a document, basically a roadmap to how the United States should conduct its foreign policy now that it was the only superpower. At that time, nobody was talking about China. China was, let's say, almost non-existent in that sense. And if you look at that document, and it's there, you can look it up on Google. It's no longer a top secret document. Basically, what it said about Russia was that Russia should not be allowed to get back on its feet. This was something that the Russians didn't know. Huh? This was the attitude of what came to be called the neocons vis-a-vis Russia. And initially, President Bush Sr. paid no attention to this. And then in came Clinton. And at a certain point, President Clinton decided that NATO should be enlarged and should include 3 countries, the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland. And Gorbachev had been promised, when he agreed to the unification of Germany, a huge decision for the Russians. When he agreed to the Berlin Wall coming down, even more importantly, when he agreed to pull out all Soviet troops from German territory, there was just one thing, one condition, that NATO not go further east.
Exactly.
Because say what you will, but for the Russians, NATO was always seen as a threat, not as a defensive organization, but as a threat. And he was promised Secretary of State Baker, President Mitterrand of France, Chancellor Kohl of Germany, and there's documents. You can look them up again. It's not like I'm inventing something or that these are some kind of rumors. These are not rumors. He was promised not 1 inch eastward. And now all of a sudden, this changed. And this was a huge blow as far as the Russians were concerned. Yeltsin was stunned. He didn't know what to say. And I think that that's where the relationship began to go south. That's where it all started, And instead of, there had been another viewpoint. The other viewpoint was, let's have a kind of a Marshall Plan and help Russia, who's in a difficult position, to develop democracy, to become part of the Western world, as we helped our enemies, Germany, after World War II, and our allies, the French and the Brits, and so on. Had that happened, we would be living in a very different world. But it didn't.
Yeah.
I think
Well, Vladimir, let me just fast forward a bit, just because of the pressures of time.
sure.
When the neocons triumphed and the policy formation leading to the nuclear expansion, NATO's expansion into Eastern Europe, culminating in the war in Ukraine. We've seen the results of that Defense Department guidance, as it was called, and it was released, everyone, in March of 1992 by Paul Wolfowitz. Well worth reading. Let's fast forward to the present moment and describe to us the current situation between Russia and the United States. Because, when we were there 30, 40 years ago, Russians and Americans were curious of each other. The Russians wanted to work with Americans. There was all kinds of creativity. Vladimir, by the way, everyone, was part of the first satellite link up between the United States and the Soviet Union. It was exciting. It was an unbelievably revolutionary moment that Russians and Americans were live on satellite with each other. And now the situation is completely collapsed, which is what's the reason why the dangers of nuclear exchange are so acute. So take a few minutes, Vladimir, just to describe the current situation.
Well, the current situation, what Jim says is absolutely right, in the sense of back then, we're talking early 1980s even, right? The average Soviet did not have bad feelings about Americans. Might be critical of quote unquote capitalism, whatever the hell that meant, because nobody really knew, of the White House or of Wall Street. But as far as the Americans were concerned, your average Soviet was actually quite friendly and a bit perhaps envious, wanting to have the same kind of material wealth that Americans had, but basically friendly and wanting to meet and so on. That today has changed dramatically. Today, your average Russian is anti-American. Will say Americans with a kind of a sneer. The feeling is that America betrayed us. We wanted to be friends, and they, behind our backs, they did things that pushed us in a different direction. If you talk to most Russians, they'll say, we never wanted that war with Ukraine. It was forced on us. Putin said many times, don't have Ukraine in NATO. We will not allow it, not any more than America would allow a foreign power to have a military base in Canada or in Mexico. Can you imagine that, right? Well, the Russians said, we will not allow this to happen. And yet they kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And what you have now is, as far as Americans are concerned, I'm sure that most of them are very negative about Russians. And what was not the case, even during Soviet times, is that Russians are very negative about Americans, not about America, but about Americans. And another thing has happened, which is quite strange. Back in the 80s, we were all afraid of nuclear war. We were all afraid of it. I remember when there was a movie called The Day After.
Mm.
And it was put out by ABC. And Americans were told if they're going to watch it, they should watch it, the family together holding hands, because it's so terribly, awfully, this thing about what could happen. People came out against nuclear war. There were marches everywhere. Now we hardly ever speak about that. We seem to have forgotten what nuclear weapons can do. I don't know why that has happened, but we've come much closer to the actual use of nuclear weapons. People talk about tactical nuclear weapons. They're smaller, they don't do the same kind of damage. And of course, anyone who knows anything about history knows that you start small and then you go very big. It doesn't stop there. And
Hiroshima bomb, but just to underscore Vladimir's point for a moment, in today's parlance, what we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki would be considered tactical.
Yeah, and and after
That's
it
the
only
range.
killed 150,000 people, so that's no big deal, right? The danger now is that on the one hand, there is no opposition to nuclear weapons and nuclear war in real terms of a major kind of outcry, like, no, we do not want this. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, these weapons have become more and more sophisticated, and the chances of nuclear war by default are very large. Jim spoke about the Cuban Missile Crisis when we actually knew what was happening. But there have been many times, and I want to underline this, when because of minor errors in the whole system of defense, we have thought that you had launched nuclear weapons at us, and you had thought that we launched them at you. Thank God we were able to move in time and stop that. But it could happen right now, as I speak.
Absolutely.
Let alone the fact that there are some people, and this I'm sure of, who say, let's nuke the bastards, excuse my French. And there doesn't seem to be much of an outcry about how can you possibly say something like that? And we're talking about the destruction of civilization as we know it. Yeah, there are bunkers down there, and maybe a couple of thousand people on both sides are going to live. And then when they come out, what are they going to see? There's nothing. So, I think that one of the goals of our discussion perhaps should be, how do we bring this issue to the attention of the people who are supposed to who represent us in your country, the senators, the representatives in the House, and in our country too? How do we make it clear that we won't allow this as human beings? I think that's a very important point.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Vladimir. We'll continue this in a moment here, but I want to bring the other panelists in, and Georg, if you could put us in a gallery view as people come in. We want to broaden the discussion now. We have talked about climate disaster. We've talked about genocide in Gaza. We've talked about cruelty to animals. We've talked about the dangers of nuclear war. We've talked about the uprising of the Gen Zs in Nepal and around the world. So I want to now pose to our panel the following question. How do you all, having heard this discussion, how do you connect the dots? What's the relationship between the code red issues that we've highlighted here? And I want to start with you, Osprey, for your comment.
Okay.
How do we connect these dots?
All right. Being put in the hot seat here, Jim. First of all, I wanted to thank the other panelists for your comments and the rich discussion and discourse that's going on. It's clearly painting a picture that does take a lot of courage for everyone listening and participating to look at. But as Jim said, it's just so important to have these really honest conversations, because if you sort of think of it like a person who's quite ill in every aspect, emotionally, mentally, physically, spiritually, if they go to the doctor for remedy, there's going to be an analysis and the need for the person who's in the position of healing to really do a deep diagnosis of that illness. And we can't really treat something we don't name, and we can't treat something if we don't know the root causes of that illness. And so I think that is what's really important for me coming forward in this conversation, is to name the imbalances, to name the illnesses, or we can't actually heal them. Just when we think about our own personal life, if we have a trauma in our own life, if we just skirt on top of it or treat it superficially, we can't actually heal. And so it's good to be in this collective wound, this collective violence together. As awful as it is a form of healing. And I think one of the things that is critical when we look at how we come into these conversations unevenly, not because we personally don't want to, but because we all come from different backgrounds of privilege, different backgrounds of gender, different backgrounds of color, different backgrounds of everything else in between, what countries we come from. It's an uneven discourse that we also need to name and how we're impacted by these things. But especially people who have, whether it was chosen or not, privilege, it can be highly uncomfortable, but it's also the place of healing. The site of the violence, the site of the pain is also the site of healing. And I think it's important to realize we can't go forward without looking at the roots, the origins, which is where we can then really heal. So I want to just name a few of the origins so we have some clarity, and I'm sure others have other views and perspectives, as we've already seen. Is that, and I wrote a whole book on worldviews because of this. It's called The Story is in Our Bones. So I'm only going to give a few points here, but if you're interested, I go into a lot of depth because, again, this is also not a time where we can do sound bites. At this level of a polycrisis, a soundbite is just not going to work. So we also have to tune our heart, our ears, our mind to deeper discourse and welcoming that as a form of healing and transformation. This isn't going to be solved, in a conference or in 20 conferences. It's our life work. Humanity has gotten ourselves into deep, dangerous entanglement, and it's going to take time to heal it. And so when I look at worldviews, I'm looking at these systems of supremacy that we find ourselves in, whether it's colonization, racism, patriarchy, or capitalism. When we look at these different systems and imperialism, these are all systems of domination, of supremacy over other, supremacy over the land, supremacy over people of color, supremacy over animals, all of it. And so one of the things that we need to dismantle and transform is supremacy, this othering, and then putting yourself on top of in a hierarchical fashion. That train of thought, that worldview has been extraordinarily dangerous to humanity. And even if we work to find out technological solutions or reach to the stars, it's not going to change that we must change ourselves fundamentally. Because we will just, even if we make it to the stars and meet with other entities, if we bring with us this imbalance, this disease, it doesn't change anything externally. Whoever we meet, what other entities, what other intelligences we connect into, if we don't transform ourselves as humanity and our deep consciousness around supremacy, nothing actually will change. It just keeps getting exported and exploited and harming. And so I would just really ask us to deeply understand, even as we come into these conversations and evenly, what that is. And these systems of oppression that I've named, of patriarchy, racism, colonization, are economic systems that see us as being more important than nature instead of being a part of. And we are nature and that we are all relatives. So what are some of the other ways of viewing this? Of course, we can learn and sit at the feet of many Indigenous peoples who have a worldview of relationship, of reciprocity, of you don't take more than you give back. How do we transform the moment we're into a grand revolution of our thinking into something I'm also looking at calling relational futurity? Like, how do we look into the future in relationship, everything in relationship versus separation? And that's the last point to make, because I want to make space for everyone to have a time to talk, is that a lot of this dehumanization that we're experiencing and violence is rooted in these systems of oppression I've named. But underneath that is this horrific unbelonging, not belonging.
Mm.
And when people don't feel they belong to one another, to the earth, to the land, to their ancestors, it creates violence. And we are seeing, all of us have talked about different violations and violence. And it comes from this sense of not belonging and this imbalance, let alone I've even talked about the fact that in patriarchy, which is what we are experiencing, we're not hearing women's voices. We're not hearing the Mother Earth. We're not hearing from the feminine. All of these systems have been built upon this domination that have come out of the patriarchy that harms women and men equally, and everyone else in between, all genders. And so we're also trying to survive patriarchy as well as colonization, and how those two ideologies are deeply intertwined. And so we have to unpack that, which we need to do slowly, but simultaneously quickly, which sounds like a paradox. But we also need to then invite in that we are operating in different time frames. And those time frames are happening simultaneously, where things have to happen quickly and slowly. And physics tells us that we can do that. I don't have time to explain that, but you can read about it. But I do want to say here that we ultimately need to balance female and male leadership. We need to respect Indigenous peoples who have deep knowledge of the land, about how to live in reciprocity with the earth, and to connect with the land in a way where we reinvigorate an animate cosmology of the forests and the waters and the mountains and the sky and the stars being alive and being our relatives, that we're all connected in a living cosmology. And we also need to understand that this violence is not going to stop until we remedy belonging. And I would also invite people belonging to each other and deeply in an embodied way, getting connected to the land where we live, but also our own ancestors. A lot of us are living out ancestral trauma that has not been resolved. And the last piece I'll share is that if we cannot connect, those of us who are not part of Indigenous societies or cultures or peoples right now, we need to connect to our pre-patriarchal, pre-colonized ancestors who lived close to the land, who did live in matriarchies. Because if we keep looking to our ancestors who are deeply embedded in the trauma and the violence making, we will continue that because we don't have anyone to turn to for a healthy relationship. And no one can give that to us but ourselves. And especially I'm talking to white people. Only you can go back into your own ancestries and pull from a healthy relationship with your ancestors, connected to the land, connected to belonging. And even if it's in a tattered and torn and broken fashion, whatever story, song, food, cultural tradition, it will bring you closer to meeting Indigenous peoples, meeting the land, meeting people who have experienced already the end of the world. If you talk to any Indigenous people, they will tell you, we've already been through the apocalypse. And we can then learn from them in a much more reciprocal way and hold our part of the pieces of the puzzle. So yes, we need a huge amount of revolution from the young people, the old people, and everybody in between, and a revolution where we listen to nature and remember that Mother Earth, the place we all live, needs to be at the center of the conversation, because if we don't respond to the living ecosystem, we won't be here to carry on this story. And it's a beautiful story, and we're in the hardest part of the story, with grief and violence and horror that none of us could have ever imagined. And so I want to hold all of you in that story, and the leadership that you bring, and everyone who's listening, the leadership you bring. We all have a role to play. None of it is too small. None of it is too big. We all have a piece of the story, and we need to lift ourselves up, work together, be in community, and do our part in the story making. And it could get a lot worse, folks, and it probably will. So we also need to think of our children in a time beyond our own that we're building for. We are building for a time beyond our own in many ways that is healthier and just. So
Thank you.
that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to bring in Jenin and Aditi in a moment, but Vladimir, I want to circle back to you, given what Osprey just said, because I think since you and I were together during those Gorbachev years and subsequently working on these matters, as I understood Gorbachev and the Russian position, in the spirit of what Osprey just said, Gorbachev really represented the spirit of belonging. He was really extending the open hand because he believed, as you remember, that it was time to transcend the polarities of the Cold War and begin to build what he called a global civilization. And the Wolfowitz memo in March of 1992 exemplified what Osprey just said, the mentality of domination, of colonialism, of wanting to keep the Russians down. And I think that was the seed kernel for everything that has transpired. So just quickly, I would love to have you comment on what we were just talking about in terms of this escalating threat of nuclear war in light of what Osprey just said, because I think she, in many ways, just sort of cut to the heart of the matter.
I have a little story to tell you. There's a hotel in Moscow where an American is staying. He lives on the third floor. He gets up in the morning, and he presses the button for the elevator to go down and have breakfast. The elevator comes down from the fifth floor. He comes in, and there's a Russian woman in the elevator. And the American gives her a big smile and says, "Good morning." And the Russian woman looks at him, looks daggers at him, and doesn't answer. The American thinks to himself, boy, these Russians, they're really unpleasant people. They must be very oppressed and so on. The Russian woman thinks, this guy's an American. He thinks he can do anything he wants with me. The point I'm making is that we don't understand each other. We look at each other only from our own framework. If people don't do things the way we do them, somehow that's wrong. I've been here in the Arab countries for quite a few weeks, and I've realized that my view of what the Arabs are like was completely wrong. And it was until I met and talked and spent time that I began to understand, why was it wrong? Well, it's what I got on television. It's what I got from reading newspapers. In that sense, I think we're all victims of media, and not only of media, and we make no effort to try to understand the other person. Either that person should be like us, or there's something wrong with that person. And that's the point that I think is tremendously important. I think a lot of effort should be made to help people meet each other. You remember Joseph Golden, who in my opinion was a visionary, and who said that if you could build huge television screens in all the big cities of the world, and people could walk up and talk to someone over there, if that happened, there would never be any war, because people would relate to each other.
Exactly.
So that's what I think is the most important thing.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Jenin, that's the cue to turn to you as an Arab and as a Palestinian. What's your comment on what Osprey said and what Vladimir just said about what you and your people are going through? And how would you connect the dots to the other issues that we are addressing today?
Yeah, thank you, Jim, for bringing me in. Um, well, first of all, Vladimir, I'm really happy that your view changed. Um, I know that, and I think that brings us to like a larger issue here is that we have all been fed propaganda by, many forces for our whole entire lives, right? And right now what we're reaching, and I think Osprey really like detailed this beautifully in like a really like existential way, is that like we're just at a crossroads of like um all of this propaganda that we've been fed, all of and the forces that have manufactured, this consent for genocide and for colonialism, um, in the East, not in the Western lands. Um, like we're at a crossroads now because we are coming out of 2 years of the world's um one of the biggest genocides ever. And it's because of that manufactured consent. And what led to that manufactured consent is I think just like the fact that we've all lived very individualistic lives, and like that is what the propaganda feeds off of, is that we've been fed this lie that you have to fend for yourself, it's survival of the fittest, you know what I mean? Like we are not all in community together, we're not all fighting for the same things together. Um, it really is just you have to like worry about yourself and worry about your sustenance, and that's it. And that's why we've come to where we are right now, which I think is what that crossroads is that I was talking about, is that we can't continue to live this way. We have to, if we truly want to make like genuine change in this world, we have to listen to each other and work together, um, and be in community with one another, because that is ultimately where we have power, is the people's movement, and is the people working together. And that's also how we like negate those sorts of um, biases or misconceptions that we might have about other people, or like, other ethnicities, because once you talk to people and have conversations with them and realize that like at the end of the day, like we're all really the same. Like we all laugh the same. We all smile the same. We all like most of us have the same interests, you know what I mean? It just depends on where you live in this world. And that's also something that I want to say about Palestinians, is that we've been dehumanized for so long. We're not seen as human beings anymore in front of, on the world stage. And that's why Israel and the US were able to carry out like a mass slaughtering campaign for 2 years, because no one saw us as human beings, but
Mhm.
Palestinians are human. We're all human, like we are all in this together.
Absolutely.
So, I
Well,
think
thank you.
just, yeah, like actively humanizing people and like Palestinians is helpful. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, when you don't have a sense of belonging and you create a separation and then a domination, and as Vladimir says, we're looking at it from our own point of view, and we make up these stories, even if it's in the elevator going down for breakfast. uh, it has results, reverberative results through the day, and shapes worldview. And I want to pick up from there, Aditi, because Jenin was talking about kind of manufactured consent. But what you folks experienced there in Nepal, as you engaged in a real revolution, is it was through social media that you were able to express yourselves in an authentic way and organize the revolution. And that's why the government tried to shut down all the social media platforms. But how would you reflect on Osprey's comment in light of that?
Thank you so much, Jim, for providing the floor once again. And I would like to thank Zanine for your kind and so powerful words. It was really moving. Like I could really feel what you were feeling while you were saying it. So it was really moving. And reflecting on what Osprey mentioned earlier, I would like to focus that I think what connects everything, like the what we as humans are doing to the climate or to the animals, or what we as a generation have been facing the problem, like we have been deprived of the opportunities of the future, is basically the greed of the older generations. I feel that is the driving fuel to this change, because we as humans are the supreme creatures with highest level of intelligence in this on this planet, and we can do anything in power. Like we have been gifted this brain, we can use this as like to create something beautiful, and to create something disastrous as well. And the greed is adding to every level. First of all, it was just house, and then it came to like have a more developed house. Then let's decide it to make some like better cities, and then we decided to add entertainment, and then we decided to add fun, and then we decided to uh, add like wars, and that add like at the cost of our mother nature. And the same grid was like our political situation for 2 long decades. The prime ministers basically were playing musical chairs between the three leaders of the uh, strongest political groups in our country, basically being KP Sharma Oli and Dahal, taking turns and being in the position for prime minister. And they were just being so greedy that they would not deliver their promises what they made earlier while asking for votes. And then we as a citizen were fed up with their just excuses, and seeing their relatives and children's living their extraordinarily lavish lifestyles out of the taxpayers' money on the social media platforms created a huge outrage among the youths, because this government that promised that yes, we will provide every one of you with jobs, we will make you graduate, and then we will give you jobs. But what we have seen, we are seeing like 1 in 5 youths are unemployed, and every day like almost 1,500 people per year are moving abroad for better opportunities. It's not that we don't want to live in our own country and do better things, but it's like we are forced, because we the inflation rate is so high. It's like increasing every year, uh, basically 10% every year, but the salaries are the same. We cannot sustain our lifestyle here. So we are basically forced to leave our own country and move to the Middle East or West to make a earning for our family. So yes, and that when the government tried to silence us by imposing the censorship, the social media ban, we used the platform that basically wasn't banned, and at that time it was TikTok, and we called out influencers to uh, bring on to bring on to people to come to the stage and uh, raise their voices against huge issues like the corruption and nepotism being the second one, because the young Nepalese people should have any sort of connection. It is like political patronage. If you are not connected to any of the political leaders in our country, then you will not get jobs easily. You will not get heard by other people as well. So we had to be connected to the political system, and the normal youth don't get such access. It's only the privilege of high government officials and the politicians. So, and the older generation, they have one problem, that like we were using the voices online and they were trying to ignore us, like, oh, this generation just talks, and they will be not they won't do anything as such. They are just like the barking dogs seldom bite. They will never come on the streets. They are just blabbering around the social media, and they have no such power, but they literally uh, kind of minimized the power of citizens. And when we are on the streets, our government was completely unprepared to face that amount.
Aditi, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you. We're starting to feel the pressure of time, everyone. So I want to just briefly turn to Ed and then Jason for your comments about how you're connecting these dots.
So, Osprey mentioned disconnection, but what does that disconnection mean? One of the most important aspects of the disconnection is that our science, our educational system has been completely reductionist. And that has completely separated us from understanding what being part of nature means. It's not putting up a protected area. And it's just how far we can see. So our whole development has been tied to our land. That's why it's agriculture. That cultural aspect of our relationship to produce our food also creates the wisdom. It also creates the tie to the community and the valuing of our environment as in the broader sense. That's where our place is. And the science led us to an agriculture that completely detached us from our agrobiodiversity. We went from 12,000 different plants in our food system to 95% coming out of 15 plants. So that has actually pushed us away from understanding. And I'll give a few examples. Animal welfare. Okay, fine. Yes, I'm not against anything about animal welfare. But almonds, olive oil, these crops are destroying billions of animals. Half of our biodiversity is under our feet. And nobody thinks of that. You know, we think of the panda and the polar bear, but we're looking at all life. So a soybean, and I grew up in South Brazil with soybean production, it kills massively everything that moves for thousands of kilometers. And then I can see people saying, no, you have to eat soy because the cattle is bad. And if you look back in history again, where were the biggest carbon deposits in the soil? Where ruminants were. The 65 million bison in central US created the biggest carbon deposits, the same as Central Africa with the migrating animals. So animals have been part of the ecosystem, but they're not included in our vision of a functioning ecosystem. Just the fact of understanding what the mycelium is, and wow, Toby Kears and Spun, Society for Prediction Underground Networks, have just brought so much new light into how the mycelium turned the Earth from Mars to what it was. By connecting the roots, by feeding, and we know now that the mycelium can actually create a new ecosystem by feeding certain plants more than others. And the plants in exchange will feed the mycelium with sugars. And that is the origin of life. That is the complexity of our relationship. We are completely tied. We're talking about horrible things that are happening, but only where the cameras are. We're not talking about millions of people dying every day because we took water as a sewer. We took water as dumping our chemicals in it. We're killing the water. And then our brain thinks, oh, we can desalinize ocean water and recover water. So it doesn't matter. How many people die? How many animals die from polluted rivers? And the factories are still polluting it. We're still polluting it. So it's actually not a massive killing. It's a massive collective suicide that we're committing. So we lost track of everything is connected. Everything what we do is connected. So the only way forward, in my opinion, is really being able to grasp that spirituality. And when I started working with spirituality in sustainability 30 years ago, people looked at me like, oh, that's religion. You know, with academia, that's the Department of Religion. No, it's not. It's the religion part is the reductionist part of it, which is put it all into that same box. No, the spiritualities are that understanding that we are part of this huge universal system. And that's where your cosmic intelligence comes in. So let's just think, and I'll be there finishing. We can reactivate the small water cycle because water is the center for life. So how do we do that? We can reactivate the carbon back into the soil, mostly using cattle. It's the most efficient ecosystem to bury carbon in the soil. And yes, there we go out with engineers measuring the farts and the burps and saying we have to kill the cows to save the planet. And it's not. If we look back 4,000 years ago, 4 billion years ago, the evolution shows us how this happened. So how do we connect with our current mentality? That's we're trained little boxes in this reductionist space. We're trained to compete since kindergarten, the best guy in math, the best one in sports. And we should throw away this educational system that was developed in England to train people to obey and to be quiet and not to be creative, and not to be, we need to be domesticated so that they could suffer 12-hour day in the industry. So our whole educational system is wrong. So we need to re-educate, and that's the part when I mentioned it's hard because it's unlearning, but we need to re-educate these generations that are here that are anyway going to be displaced with artificial intelligence on how to reconnect, really reconnect with nature from the roots.
Thank you, Ed. I want to turn it over to Jason in a moment and then Mak'ule for her comment. But I just want to say that, we're launching a strategic initiative with Ed on a world mycelium learning network. And as president of a university, having attended many of the elite institutions, I can vouch for what Ed just said, that a fundamental change needs to take place in how human beings learn what they learn. Because we're storytellers, and the stories that we tell ourselves are largely how we perceive the world and how we shape our attitudes and determine our actions. So the learning mechanisms and processes we humans have developed are in need of radical transformation. So thanks for bringing that in, Ed. Jason, what's your view on these matters of connecting these dots?
Yeah, I think the conversation has been powerful. I think what everybody's brought to the table is really enriching. And I strongly believe that we should not ignore our historical oppression that we've inherited, that we've contributed to, that exists today. Because as spoken earlier by us talking about it and identifying and pointing at us, gives us the platform to say how we're going to move forward. And while I don't have a solution in terms of how to do that, I have the approach that I bring to myself and to the work that I do with a radical guide is really to look at the term liberation. I know that means a lot for a lot of different people, and I think that's why it's so important to me, is because once as an individual, as self, we can define what liberation means for us. There's a strength in that. That gives us a path forward of what the world that we want to create. But we can't stop there. And I think that's what we've seen happen, replicated in throughout history, is we stopped there. We also have to not just think about and answer for ourselves, but be in conversation is what does liberation look like for you, where you are, where your life experiences have cultivated who you are. And then when we can understand what liberation means to you, then the question becomes, how do we move forward together to achieve the collective liberation? So it's not just human to human, it's human to nature. It's when we ask, what does liberation look like for a river? What does liberation look like for the air? Our relationship to everything around our changes. that conversation, that communication that we're seeking and trying to build tools for already exist if we just ask the questions. If we're not asking the questions of what liberation looks like, we're never going to hear the answer. And we can never achieve our greatness if we never ask for it. And so that's how I want to connect the dots in the conversations that I do with Radical Guide, the publications, the podcasts, the workshops. All of that is deeply rooted in what does liberation look like where we are today, right now, with the group that we're speaking of. Because when we can name that and name that honestly, that's the work that we need to do. And if we do that enough and replicate that enough, that changes. You know, going back to what was said earlier, looking back at that of cultures and peoples before colonialism, before capitalism, connecting to that shows us that the tools, that the language, that the access of creating that liberation exist. And we can't fool ourselves. It's not pretty and perfect and everything. But if that is our way forward and our grounding steps, things will be different. Because right now, we're not asking that questions and we're seeing separation. We're seeing people being disposed. We're seeing the earth being exploited. And we can't continue that way. So that's how I would connect the dots. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh boy, well, in this spirit, I want to turn to you, Makaulule, from South Africa. She's part of the Venda nation that existed centuries before the colonial period. And she has been, and her people have been on that land in northern South Africa, what is now South Africa. That name was bestowed by the British next to Mozambique and Zimbabwe. Makaulule, how would you connect the dots? And what do you think is the way forward?
Listening to all what has been said, explained, and connecting now to the closing, starting from Osprey and all of us here. Still, for me to reconnect, to collect this in one basket is still the cause, the root cause. And for me, through the experience, through the way I see, even today, the cause is not touched. Spirituality. The cause which we even experience in here, Venda, is the way the spirituality has been taken away to be imposed into religion. And whenever we go, people who are causing this problem, this disorder, they pray. Our leaders, they pray, but they authorize the disorder because religion has taken away the spirituality from the integrity. Integrity, if those who explain it in dictionary or somewhere, is not a law. It's not the thing which you follow it before because you are afraid of going to burn in hell. You have integrity because it's this way of systems of life. But if leaders, our presidents, our leaders, our ministers, all who are in the top up to the recent COP still saying they approve the collapse which caused ecocide. A leader who's still saying, I'm the leader in the countries where the innocent babies are killed, but still standing as the leader and pray God. Who is that God? The root cause for me, through my experiences which cause disorder even here in Venda, is when religion come and disconnect us to nature. Here in South Africa, the dominating religion is Christianity. And they said the Bible is sacred. But those who brought Bible, they brought Bible when the slavery, the colonization, the displacing people from their land is happening. But those missionaries, they didn't tell the colonizers who are causing the conflicts and say you are doing wrong. But in the Bible, they said don't steal, don't kill. But killing was happening when missionaries are carrying this black and red mouth book. All over the world, there's no one who said, my God. Even the one who is leading the place where children are and babies and youth are killed. But at the end, still say, God, we have been removed from the true, I don't know if spirituality is the enough word. We have been disconnected to nature. If we could see nature like indigenous people, if we could see nature as God, we will see that we are also nature. As those who said God created, you are created as an image of God. How can you disorder and structure nature while you pray God? Honestly, in this world, the religion has made disorder, as is Aditi or Jenin mentioned about somewhere there. How can we say we are praying and we have God while on the other side we are killing the systems which God created? The religion has disordered the world, and the religion has disconnected people because what Aditi or Jenin said. Who are you when you are there and still feel that you have good way of leading these people? But you are saying there is God. Our leaders, they must be told, they don't belong to be the leaders. If they don't see deeper, how can you pray and lead and still feel that you have your breakfast, your bedroom, your house, your everything, while there is this disorder? For truly speaking, religion has disordered everything. And religion is an imposed human being. Yeah, what Aditi comes. Individualism. Christianity, I'm talking from what I have fight until I become cultivated to be who you are. I was fighting religion of Christianity because it's about individualism. And in the Bible, as here is Christianity, it's about saving your soul, saving yourself to go to heaven. I don't know what is that heaven, where there will be fire to burn the people who are doing the sin. That is the religion of Christianity. It's about you individually. As one of the young people talk about individualism, the religion is about you. alone as individually to go to that heaven. Even though you are butchering animal, you are killing, you are destroying the soil, you are putting pesticides, but you pray and said you are going to heaven. Which heaven? Religion has brought and caused this problem. And until the world attack this religion, we will never solve this. Young people, children, babies, those not yet born, ancestors will never, never have the guarantee of well-being. Only those who are from the adult and elders, parents. We are absorbing money to fulfill our physical being, but not caring about youth, children, babies, not yet born, ancestors, because those on top, they are living in the religion which does not root itself to the reality of integrity. Ethics have been conducted and written as law, and you cannot teach people ethics. It's a way of living a system, and religion has broken that system. I see that religion is the cause of the disorder. We are seeing that it will collapse the life system.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That was powerful. As they were saying in the chat, preach on, sister, preach on. Well, everyone, I want to thank you, and Makaulale, thank you for blessing us as we started this morning and bringing this to such a profoundly incisive summary for this discussion on the code red issues of our time. You know, as Gorbachev said, we need to look at reality ruthlessly, and I want to thank all of our presenters today because they have been doing that. In 30 minutes at 2:30 Eastern, we will reconvene for our second session of today that will be dealing with the third and fourth data points that we all have to grapple with, and that's the revolution in artificial intelligence and the reality that technologically advanced non-human intelligences are here with us. So Vladimir, Jenin, Jason, Makaulale, Ed, Osprey, and Aditi, thank you so much for your deep wisdom today. Very much appreciated. Thank you all. Vladimir, get some sleep there in Jordan. Ed, thank you for your passion, and Makaulale, really appreciate your wisdom today. And Jenin, thank you, Aditi. And as we close, everyone, let us salute not only the elder, but our Gen Zs, our emerging generation. It gives me so much strength and hope that you are with us and on the front lines on behalf of us all. Thank you all. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in about 30 minutes for our second session.